Tonight, after nearly 1,000 days of war, Ukraine is given the go-ahead to strike its neighbour deeper than ever before. In a move that shocked many, Russia will soon be at risk of attack from long-range rockets far from the front line.
Here in Kyiv, people are hoping this could be a turning point in a war that shows no sign of stopping.
Meanwhile, in Moscow, tensions simmer and questions remain over how President Putin will respond.
And here in Brazil, opinion among leaders of the G20 group of economic powers is divided over Russia's war in Ukraine, the use of American missiles, and how the conflict should end.
Plus, away from Ukraine, the power of dance. I'll be joined by the directors of award-winning documentary Daughters on the prison programme Transforming Lives. Good evening. Since Russia's invasion, President Zelensky has called on the West to give his country the means, the real means, to defend itself. Nearly 1,000 days into the war, it seems that call is finally being answered. Joe Biden has given Ukraine the green light to fire rockets like these supplied by America deep into Russian territory. It's a prospect not welcomed by Moscow. The Kremlin says the outgoing president is simply adding fuel to the fire, describing the decision as a dangerous provocation, potentially even an escalation. Well, it came as world leaders gathered in Brazil for the G20 summit, there to discuss everything from the economy to climate change. But, of course, there was only one topic in town. Tonight, we'll hear from one of Vladimir Putin's close former aides on what the Russian leader's next move may be. Plus, what might the president-elect have to say about all of this, with just 9 weeks until Donald Trump is once again the decision-maker? Our chief correspondent, Stuart Ramsey, has our first report from Kyiv.
Russian armoured vehicles heading towards Ukraine positions, firing as they go, but also being engaged. These are some of the latest pictures from the front line in Kursk, the Russian region invaded by Ukraine in the summer. Soldiers who gave Sky News this material say they're facing more and more of these attacks. This vehicle was destroyed, but they say it's non-stop. In the skies as well, it's relentless. Russian drones and missiles tracked and shot at by air defence teams every night, with varying levels of success. Long-range missiles would allow Ukraine to attack the places where these missiles come from. Ukrainian politicians like Lysia Vasilenko applaud President Biden's decision, but say it should go further.
It's an almost historic decision. Having a permission to strike inside of all of Russia would really change things around for the people of Ukraine first and foremost, but also on the battlefield. However, as things stand now, we have only limited permission to strike.
Do you think it'll change?
We certainly will work towards it changing.
The Russian offensive is now augmented by 10,000 North Korean soldiers. It's at the root of President Biden's change of heart. Russia is furious, claiming it's an escalation of the war.
It is obvious that the outgoing administration in Washington intends to take steps, and they have been talking about this, to continue adding fuel to the fire and provoking further escalation of tensions of this conflict.
President Zelensky, visiting frontline troops in the east of the country, has not been drawn on the subject of the change in use for long-range weapons, only saying that missiles will do the talking. Well, there's long been a feeling amongst the civilian population as well as the military that Western countries, and in particular the United States, have only ever given them enough weapons to hold the ground against Russia, not to take the fight to them. They believe that basically the West is scared of Russia. Well, they're hoping now with this new permission to fire long-range missiles, things may have changed. Deadly missile strikes on Ukraine continue. A residential building in Odessa was struck in the afternoon. Emergency services say a number of people were killed or injured in the attack, both inside and outside the building. It comes after a wave of drone and missile attacks on Ukraine's energy infrastructure that has caused widespread power cuts, a Russian tactic throughout this war. In Kyiv's Maidan Square, flags commemorating the fallen flutter in the winter wind. 1,000 days since the Russian invasion began, civilians and soldiers alike are still dying. But Ukraine is still fighting. 1,000 days ago, few thought that was likely.
And Stuart joins me now from Kyiv. Stuart, we haven't officially had the news from Joe Biden himself, but what's the mood tonight in the Ukrainian capital? How are people feeling?
I think people are relatively pleased with this. Obviously, it's quite a big step. The government here has been asking Western governments, particularly the United States, for permission to fire these long-range missiles into Russia. And now they have at least been given that, and they'll hope to build on it. But as it stands now, of course, it really is only in the Kursk region. This is an area of Russia that Ukraine took in the summer and still holding parts of it now, and there's this huge build-up of Russian troops taking place there to try and take it back, including foreign fighters from North Korea who are joining their ranks. So that is going to be, they've got permission, they can attack there, and I've no doubt we will see that in the coming days. But the government here, the military, want to be able to fire these long-range weapons at any targets that they choose, and that'll be the various bases where missiles and drones are launched against Ukraine on a daily basis now, and that's an obvious one they will go for. They'll also want to go for build-up of troops elsewhere, munitions bases, you name it, they want to be able to go for it. And as it stands now, they don't have permission to do that. I think it's also worth remembering they've had these missiles for some time, and they have been using them, and they have been given a relatively small supply. We don't know how many they've used, and we don't know whether they're going to get a resupply. And obviously, we don't know if the whole thing's going to come to a stop when Donald Trump takes over the presidency. So I'd say relatively pleased with what's happened, but they want to build on it, want to get permission to fire whatever weapons they've got left in any targets that they choose.
Stuart, thank you. So all this talk of missiles, but what exactly are the weapons in question? And more importantly, how far could they reach inside Russia? Our international correspondent Alex Rossi has been looking at the details.
After months of pleas from the Ukrainians, America has finally allowed Ukraine to use US missiles to strike deep inside Russian territory. So is this the game changer that could turn the tide in Kyiv's favour? The Americans had already provided Ukraine with the MGM-140 Army tactical missile system, but there were limitations on its use. Known as ATACMS, they're long-range ballistic missiles that can strike targets 186 miles away with a warhead that can hold about 375 pounds of explosives. ATACMS can have two types of warhead, a single high-explosive variant, as well as a warhead that can carry cluster munitions. Ukraine has said they could be used to stop or slow down troop movements or destroy Russian air or military bases, which would help Ukraine in the defence of its own territory. And this map shows how far the missiles could reach inside Russia and the potential targets. They include airfields, ammunition warehouses, radars, and missile bases. Now, on the face of it, it's a big military edge, but the Russians are already responding by moving hardware and personnel out of range. The Biden administration has made clear it's the presence of North Korean troops here in the Kursk region that pushed them to change their minds on the use of ATACMS. It means the Ukrainian army can now use them to repel Russia's anticipated counteroffensive in Kursk. Ukraine captured this territory in August and is now attempting to defend it. President Biden's decision will likely see the British government follow suit, allowing the use of its Storm Shadow missiles. Storm Shadow has a shorter range, about 155 miles, and it's launched from an aircraft. But the Russians are furious, seeing this latest development as a major provocation as it crosses some of Putin's red lines. They've not made clear how they'll respond, but a response is coming. It could take the form of support for the West's enemies or even a cyber attack on its interests.
The Russians are plainly very angry. There are things they could do. They could, for example, supply missiles to the Houthis to use against Western tankers in the Red Sea. I think they're likely to be quite constrained because they are looking forward to Trump's arrival in the anticipation that Trump will put pressure on Ukraine towards doing some sort of a deal. And they won't want to take any actions which complicate the likelihood of that.
Allowing long-range weapons to be used deep inside Russia is a major development. It will certainly be a boost for Ukraine's morale at a time when it's losing ground in the Donbass. But it's unlikely to change the trajectory of the war in isolation. The deep strikes will, though, be a complication for Moscow. It will make it more difficult for President Putin to present the war as an overwhelming success, especially if Russian military assets start blowing up well inside its territory.
Whatever the type of missile, just the fact the West has finally given in to arming Volodymyr Zelensky with more weapons has angered some, not least President Putin, who will no doubt be weighing up what to do next. Russia has warned that an attack with long-range weapons would constitute a radical change in the war. Ivor Bennett joins me now from Moscow. And Ivor, what sort of response could we expect to see from Vladimir Putin in the coming days?
Well, we haven't heard from Vladimir Putin yet. We have heard from the Kremlin and his official spokesman, Dmitry Peskov, and the rhetoric was typically robust, what we've come to expect whenever this topic is brought up. He accused the US of ratcheting up the tensions. He said the US will be directly involved in the conflict and this will mark an escalation. And I think that word escalation, I think a lot of people will think that's a bit rich coming from Russia, given the reports of thousands of North Korean troops being deployed by Moscow to the front line to aid its forces. But there was no mention of that. Moscow only ever accuses others of escalation. It says its actions are always reciprocal. So what could a response from Vladimir Putin look like? The Kremlin referred to his remarks he made on this topic back in September when he said if permission is granted to Kyiv to use Western-made weapons deeper inside Russia, then Russia would be forced to take appropriate decisions. Those decisions still haven't been defined. They've still been kept deliberately vague, I think. Previously, Vladimir Putin has raised the prospect of sending weapons to Western adversaries to strike Western targets abroad. He's never mentioned any country specifically, but the assumption was that he was potentially referring to Iran or Iranian proxies like the Houthis in Yemen. He's also frequently referred to the nuclear option, of course. That's happened a number of times. And not so long ago, Russia updated its nuclear doctrine, which would allow it, in theory, to respond with nuclear weapons if Western missiles fall on Russian soil. But the calculus in Washington seems to be that this is a bluff from Moscow, another one. They have tried to establish red lines previously in this conflict, for example, on the supplying of missiles in the first place to Kyiv, battle tanks too, fighter jets too. Those have all been supplied to Ukraine by the West without incurring the repercussions that were threatened. But I think there is still a concern that Moscow could potentially respond in other ways, more subtle ways that it doesn't want to broadcast, along the lines of sabotage and cyber attacks, which Europe accuses Moscow of carrying out already. And we know they are growing closer and strengthening ties with Iran. So I think this public fury we've heard today from the Kremlin won't worry the West so much. It's more what they might do out of sight behind the scenes.
Indeed. Ivor, thank you. Well, this was all triggered by Joe Biden, an outgoing president, yet still a president, who looks to be cementing his legacy with this somewhat late-in-the-day decision. In September, my colleague Yalda Hakim asked US Secretary of State Antony Blinken about this very subject. Have a listen.
It's not simply saying, oh, should they have this weapon system or that weapon system? There are a lot of things that go into it. Do they know how to use it? And some of these sophisticated systems take training, and that's one of the other things we've done. Can they maintain it? Because if you give them something that falls apart in 7 days because it can't be maintained, that doesn't do a lot of good. And then is it part of a coherent strategy to achieve a very clear objective? All of those things have to go into these decisions, but what I can tell you is we've adapted and adjusted every step along the way. We'll continue to do that.
So not ruling out at this stage?
We never rule out, but when we rule in, we want to make sure it's done in such a way that it can advance what the Ukrainians are trying to achieve.
In the past few minutes, we've heard from Ukraine's foreign minister speaking at the UN. David Lammy is chairing a Security Council meeting there. Let's listen in.
It could be a game changer, and the longer Ukraine can strike, the shorter the war will be. And our Ukraine's position has always been clear. We have a full right to strike military targets on the territory of Russia.
Well, Mark Stone joins me now from Washington, D.C. And Mark, that Security Council session underway. What is being said?
Yeah, look, first of all, I thought the new foreign minister of Ukraine who you saw there, his language was interesting. I mean, he was presenting this decision by President Biden to allow the Ukrainians to use these longer range weapons as a game changer. It could be a game changer. He says, of course, it depends on where they are allowed to use these weapons. Where, remember, the Americans will have control over the systems themselves, which is why it's so controversial, because in a sense it means the Americans are more involved in a war that hitherto they could have said, well, we're providing them with weapons, but it's up to them what they do with them. Now they're more involved. And so I think clearly the Ukrainians believe this could be a game changer. The attempt is to try and make sure that Ukraine is in as strong a position as possible. And that 1,000 days in since this war started, since the latest round of this war, because remember, it's been going in one sense or another since 2014, since Russia took Crimea, that 1,000 days tomorrow. And that is why, as the current chair, the current president of the Security Council, Britain's David Lammy, is in the chamber now, and he spoke a few moments ago.
Everyone on this council should be familiar from the climate crisis with the concept of tipping points, the critical moment after which changes are irreversible. These exist in geopolitics as they do in science. And unless Putin fails, I believe we face one over Ukraine. Unless Putin fails, we could plunge into a world where the principles enshrined in the UN Charter will have lost their meaning.
Mark, and all eyes now on the president-elect and questions about how he might deal with this situation. Could he potentially reverse what Joe Biden has put in place?
Yeah, well, yes. And interestingly, I was struck by the language and the specific phrases that both Lammy and the Ukrainian foreign minister used a few moments ago. The Ukrainian foreign minister talked about peace through strength, the concept of peace through strength. Now, he is literally parroting what Donald Trump has been saying for many years now, that he wants peace through strength. And so I think that it's interesting that they are choosing to borrow the language of Donald Trump, appeal to Donald Trump and say, look, you understand the concept of peace through strength. Well, that is precisely what we need to show Vladimir Putin. And David Lammy was saying that Vladimir Putin only understands the language of strength. He doesn't respond to weakness. And therefore, I think what they're trying to do is appeal beyond President Biden, although Lammy said we only deal with one president at a time. But they're also explicitly going beyond Biden to that date, January the 20th, when Donald Trump takes over, because they know that Donald Trump has said he wants to bring the war to an end. He says he can do it in a day, and they fear, the West, the other Western allies and Ukraine, that it could involve a capitulation to Russia and the handing over of Russian land, of Ukrainian land to Russia. I think what is clear is that there is a belief that Donald Trump is a man who likes to be seen to win. He does not want to be seen as being a pushover to Putin, and so they're holding on to that idea that he doesn't want to be a pushover, and that hopefully some good can come out of this for Ukraine. It is also the case that the reason why, I think one of the reasons why President Biden has decided that now is the point to push things a bit further and to say to Ukraine, yes, you can use our weapons to strike within Russia, because he has thought for a long time that would prompt Putin to do something to retaliate in a larger way. He now thinks that maybe Putin won't do that because Biden knows that Trump's going to take over and Putin might have something to gain from a Trump presidency. And so Putin's less likely to push things. But it's a careful calculus that they are making in the White House. And I suppose the last point to make is the real fear is that if these American weapons with American help end up killing a lot of Russian troops or worse still, Russian civilians, well, then that could change things significantly. So it's a big risk that President Biden Biden is taking, but it's one he feels he can now take, and he felt before that he couldn't.
Mark, thank you very much for that. Well, do stay with us on The World. Coming up, can a summit overshadowed by two major wars make any headway? We'll be live at the G20 in Rio de Janeiro next.
I'm Stuart Ramsey, and I'm Sky's chief correspondent.
An enormous explosion that's just come down. I think it was a monster just landed in between us.
Hundreds and hundreds of people hoping to get north, ultimately to get to the United States.
It's a border where they're not welcome, yet they keep coming.
We saw snatch squads going in, grabbing people, taking them out and putting them into trucks and taking them away.
They make about 50 kilos of fentanyl a week. It's incredibly dangerous and toxic stuff.
There's been an upsurge in deaths. The fighting between the gangs is getting more and more vicious. Is this now all your territory?
Yeah.
The battlefield is outside the barricades, which is over there.
This is much more like a normal town.
It's really sending a clear message that Venezuela is eager for change. We're being crushed.
Free from wherever you get your news. We are in the middle of a forest, in a jungle really, and they're attempting to keep these men alive. This is real, hardcore emergency medicine. The information on this could bring down the entire network, not just in Iraq and Syria, but across the world. Sky News, the full story first.
Well, hundreds of thousands of people have been using the beast for years to traverse Mexico, but it is really dangerous. Many people have died riding it.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
This conflict. They keep telling us that they want aid.
And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
You want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
Welcome back. It was a big day at the G20 summit in Brazil, made even more significant by news that President Biden will allow Ukraine to use long-range missiles to strike deep inside Russia. How that news went down in Rio, however, is a bit of a mixed bag. President Putin wasn't in attendance, but as our security and defence editor Deborah Haynes reports, his presence was still felt.
Keir Starmer staying quiet on whether Ukraine can fire British missiles inside Russia. Instead, using a meeting of world powers in Brazil to speak out loudly against Moscow's invasion.
We must double down on our support for Ukraine. Tomorrow is day 1,000 of the conflict. That's 1,000 days of aggression from Russia. And 1,000 days of sacrifice from Ukraine. We need to make sure Ukraine has what is necessary for as long as necessary, because we cannot allow Putin to win this war.
Even if the green light is given for Ukraine to use British Storm Shadow cruise missiles inside Russia, it's unlikely the UK will confirm anything until they've actually been launched. Yet with the US finally giving permission to Ukrainian forces to unleash American long-range missiles on Russian soil, the impact of the war is overshadowing this G20 summit. Interactions at the gathering of the world's biggest economies reflect how the balance of global power is shifting, with China on the rise, Russia still in the room, and Western influence waning.
Ukraine. The United States strongly supports Ukraine's sovereignty and territorial integrity. Everyone around this table, in my view, should as well.
Joe Biden remains a powerful figure, but with far less clout in the final days of his presidency. Against this backdrop, Britain's Prime Minister met China's president at the summit. A delicate balancing act, pitching security concerns against economic desires.
As permanent members of the UN Security Council and major global economies, China and the UK share a dual responsibility of advancing our respective national development and addressing global challenges.
We want our relations to be consistent, durable, respectful, as we have agreed. Avoid surprises where possible, and strengthen dialogue should provide stronger understanding.
Yet the leaders here know these are unstable times, and they're about to get even more unpredictable with Donald Trump's imminent return to the world stage.
Let's go live now to Deborah in Rio. And Deborah, although President Putin wasn't there, it seems opinion over Ukraine is still very much divided.
Yes, good evening from Rio de Janeiro, where behind me you can see maybe the building. We're in an art museum in the city where the leaders, they've been meeting all day in these largely closed-door discussions, and they're now having a closed-door dinner hosted by the Brazilian president. But like you say, opinion among the leaders very much split over what happens, not just with the war in Ukraine. You also have the other big war that has been talked about on the sidelines here, Israel's war in Gaza, also in Lebanon, concerns about the growing tensions between Israel and Iran. The US, the UK, the Canadian leader, the German leader, the French leader, there are many Western allies who are here, who do all sing from the same sheet when it comes to how to deal with the crisis in Ukraine. But you do also have people like Xi Jinping of China, a close ally of Russia. The Russian president not here. He faces an arrest warrant from the International Criminal Court over suspected war crimes in Ukraine, which has kept him away. But his foreign minister is here. It's very much a presence that's felt in the room. And then you have the countries that are undecided as well. Countries like India, which is allied with Russia, but also has close ties with the UK and other Western allies. It's a complex picture, and it really means that out of this summit, you won't expect any definitive direction on the course of action that the world leaders here would like to see in Ukraine. It might not even be mentioned in the communique. It should be, though. It's something to look out for. But it really does underline the shifting sands, these changing times, unpredictable times, new powers emerging, and, of course, the prospect of a second Donald Trump presidency and all the unpredictability that that is also going to bring.
Deborah, thank you. We wait to see the conclusions of the G20. Thank you. Stay with us on The World. Coming up, I'll ask a man who used to be Vladimir Putin's closest advisor how the Russian leader might respond after Joe Biden's big decision.
secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war.
This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
Welcome back. We're going to stay with Ukraine now and how Russia might respond to America granting President Zelensky the long-range missiles he's repeatedly asked for. All eyes are on Vladimir Putin. A man who knows what will be going through the Russian leader's mind is his former advisor, Sergei Markov. I spoke to him a short while ago.
From our point of view, it's a wrong understanding. United States doesn't allow Ukrainian army to use those rocket missiles. These rocket missiles used by American army because technically Ukrainian army not able to use those two kind of rocket missiles, cruise missiles like Storm Shadow and ballistic missiles like ATACMS. Both of them needed United States militaries to target them to the Russian territory. That's why we regarded that this decision of United States is direct involvement of United States to the war against Russia.
But why do you think the United States has taken that decision? Well, what do you think has precipitated this decision now? It's something that Ukraine has been calling for a very long time. Why now?
Now it's because elections are over. Before the election, Joe Biden could not give this decision because he understood very well that such kind of aggressive policy against Russia very unpopular among American citizens. And if Biden made this decision before, it can undermine political position of Kamala Harris. So he made it decision after the election because he knows that American people want peace, but not United States aggression against Russia.
Do you think it might, just to butt in there, because we're running short of time, do you think it might have anything to do with the deployment of North Korean troops to bolster Russian troops? There is much anguish from America and Ukraine at this development.
I think this is only pretext. Northern Korean troops only pretext. The main reason of Biden's decision is to undermine Donald Trump coming to power. At minimum, Joe Biden wants to block attempts of Donald Trump when he will be inaugurated as president to make a peace deal with Russia and Ukraine. And the maximum option, probably this crisis in between United States and Russia could be used by Joe Biden for the blocking Donald Trump to become the president. My prediction that CIA or FBI can claim some kind of fake news about secret connection between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin, and then they will orchestrate demand from European allies of the United States, Great Britain first of all, with demands not to allow Donald Trump to be the new president because he has connected with Russian president. It's this attempt of the blocking result of the presidential elections.
Do you believe that Ukraine should be afforded the right to protect itself from aggression?
Of course, Ukraine, as any country, has the right to protect itself from the aggression. But Ukraine doesn't defend itself now. Ukrainian regime is aggressive regime who is killing Ukrainian people on the Donbass already more than 10 years. And Russia made humanitarian operation for saving millions of lives from the aggressive, Russophobic, neo-Nazi style regime imposed by United States of America and Great Britain to the Ukrainian poor people.
President Putin says it's a declaration of war, this involvement. What does that mean for the UK and the United States? Will Russia now be at war with them?
If United States and Great Britain are now directly taking part in war against Russia, it means that all militaries of US and Great Britain are becoming legitimate goals for the Russian military. So as a first step, we can say that some of the probably intelligence aviation jet could be crashed by Russian army. And some of the satellite of United States, Great Britain also could be attacked and could be crashed. On the next stage,
are you saying
probably,
that the United Kingdom is now a target for Russia?
United Kingdom now not target yet, because these attacks of the Storm Shadow didn't happen yet. If Storm Shadow will attack Russian territory, with participation of British officers and American officers, Great Britain will put own militaries as legitimate goals, targets for the Russian militaries automatically. If you decided to kill us, we have to protect ourselves.
Well, Sergei Markov there, I spoke to him a little earlier. MPs in Russia have been warning of what may come next, with one predicting President Biden's decision could trigger the start of World War III. But what do lawmakers in Kyiv make of the move? Let's speak to the Ukrainian MP, Andrei Osechuk. Thank you very much for speaking to us. I believe you listened in to a little bit of what was being said there by Sergei Markov. What did you make of what he had to say?
First of all, I don't think that is a good idea to have Russian propaganda on your smart TV channel. Secondly, we already heard that number of times. Threatening of the outside world is the probably most advanced skill of Kremlin and all FSB. If you remember well, we heard the same in summer 2022 when Ukraine received HIMARS missiles launchers from US and Germany. Then we heard the same from Russia in February 2023 when we've got Abrams tanks from United States and Leopard 2 from Germany and other European countries. At that month, the same rhetoric was from Kremlin. Then we've heard the same when we've got finally F-16s and Russians were threatening you and was repeating the same. And now definitely they sing in the same song about, as you say, long-range missiles. But two things are very important. First, it's not really long-range missiles because we're talking about 300 kilometers maximum or 350. It's not long range. Secondly, I want to remind you that we have been already used Storm Shadow against military targets of Russian Federation in Crimea. Based on Russian law and Russian constitution, Crimea, on their view, is Russian territory. But Crimea has been already attacked by Ukraine dozens of times using Storm Shadow, Scalp, and ATACMS, meaning that in this war, we have been already used cruise missiles obtained from the West against Russian territory, which they believe so. So that's why there is nothing new except the thing that they're very much afraid that slowly, but we receive more and more military capabilities in our resistance against Russian aggression.
But do you see this decision by President Biden as an escalation of the war? Do you see it as a game changer? Is it the beginning of the end, as you see it, or is it an escalation?
We're a little bit sick about the word escalation. I would say that it is very much delayed decision. And this decision is supposed to be taken months and months and probably 2 years ago. And again, I will repeat, we already used cruise missiles delivered to Ukraine from our Western allies against territories which Russia treat as Russian territories. So nothing new is happening. The only new thing that Ukraine will receive more capabilities attacking Russian logistics, because modern war is mostly the war of logistics. As more distance you have to attack your enemy targets, is better. And again, it was extremely unfair that for 1,000 days, we were in extremely asymmetric situation when Russians were attacking us from several thousands kilometers, and we were able to reply only maximum 70 or 100 kilometers. So it's at least giving some justice to Ukrainian support and to Ukrainian resistance. And I want to remind you that we are under daily attack of Russian Federation. Daily we are losing civilians. Daily we are losing our military personnel. So we are still at the hot stage of the war. And the only way how we can stop Russian Federation, it's not just to speak loud, as your prime minister just said, but we need to act loud. That's the only language which is understood by Putin and all his FSB gang.
You say that nothing really has changed. Do you see this as too little, too late then?
Just today, if I'm not mistaken, the head of European diplomacy, Mr. Borrell, who is also finishing his term at his position, become very, very fair. And he said honestly that unfortunately all the support which was given to Ukraine was very, very slow. Today, European Union confirmed that it finally fulfilled its promise to deliver to Ukraine 1 million shells for our artillery. But this delivery was with 7 months delay. Can you imagine? It was promised to Ukraine. It was not our fantasy. It was promised by European Union and our allies in NATO, but delay was on 7 months. Can you imagine how it was painful and critical for Ukrainian military? So that's why, unfortunately, yes, we fight every day, but unfortunately, a lot of loud words on the West was not properly supported with loud actions.
I just want to get a quick comment from you, if you don't mind. We are running out of time. Donald Trump Jr. has said on social media that the military-industrial complex seems to want to make sure they get World War III going before my father has a chance to create peace and save lives. Could this be the start of World War III?
I would suggest you to listen to New Washington officials. Let's wait when the new team will be properly appointed by Senate, and then let's listen to these people, but not just friends and relatives of American president.
Andriy Osadchuk, thank you very much for speaking to us this evening on Sky News.
Thank you.
Next up, a change of pace. I'll be joined by directors of an award-winning film all about a daddy-daughter dance event behind bars. Find out more next.
We've come to one of Moscow's Cold War bunkers. It was built as a top-secret command centre.
Being here really feels like you're stepping back in time. I'm Ivor Bennett, Sky's Moscow correspondent.
A show of military might and menace.
Courage, bravery and sacrifice will win the day.
It's a new subject. They'll learn about combat drones and some how to handle a Kalashnikov.
The Kremlin continues to put forward its own version of events, both present and past.
There's no mention of the fact that Russia invaded its neighbour. That's rewriting history, isn't it?
Now we have to read it carefully.
Vladimir Putin put forward his plan for a ceasefire in Ukraine, telling Kyiv, pull out of your eastern territories and the war will end. Why should the West trust you?
Frankly, I don't care whether the West trusts us or not.
Vladimir Putin is already the Kremlin's longest-serving leader since Stalin. The question is, what will a fifth Putin term mean for Russia and the world?
Why do you support Vladimir Putin, Mr. Segal?
I can't answer questions that stupid.
I've watched Vladimir Putin attempt to create a new world order.
The St. Petersburg Economic Forum was the backdrop to Vladimir Putin's latest verbal volley that Russia could send missiles to other nations to target the West. Ambassador, I wonder, shall we have a quick word for Sky News? Is the West right? Are you fueling Russia's war machine?
Swedish media, oh my God, you're not afraid of being here.
American journalist Evan Gershkovich is on trial here, who was first on display.
Russia says Evan Gershkovich was caught red-handed, but has never produced any evidence to back that up. Sky News. Get the full story first.
Gives you the very best of Sky News wherever you are. Breaking news, videos, analysis up at 6%. Podcasts, watching us live. Joins us live all in one place and all at just the touch of a screen. The Sky News app. Get the full story first.
We've got your Sunday mornings covered. From the front page and the sounds of the streets to the voices of the people who make the major calls and big picture politics beyond Westminster. We'll put you at the heart of our story. A new start to Sunday.
I'm ready. Are you?
Join me, Trevor Phillips, Sunday mornings on Sky News.
Play Sky News.
From the Sky News Centre at 7.
Now that you're up to date, we can go into a bit more detail.
Things can change incredibly quickly.
Taken by surprise.
Have you ever known a moment like this in British politics before? Yes. Cheers.
We'll start with breaking news.
Let's get the latest on the ground.
So, by the end, we'll hopefully all understand what's going on in the world just that little better.
Welcome back. Now, governments here and around the world are grappling with prison reform and finding the most effective ways to prevent reoffending amongst inmates who were released. A unique programme in the United States has seen success by bringing jailed fathers together with their daughters behind bars for a dance event. Their journeys are documented in the Netflix film Daughters. Take a look.
One girl said, my dad can't come to the dance because he's in jail. And one girl suggested, why don't we just take the dance in the jail?
You guys, a golden opportunity to see your daughters and spend time with them. But I'm gonna be very honest with you guys. It's gonna be an emotional roller coaster for you.
I'm pleased to say the documentary's directors, Angela Patton and Natalie Ray, are with us tonight. Welcome to you both. It's a tearjerker. I'll just let people know that. Tell us first where the idea for the film came from to make this documentary, Angela.
Yes. Well, it came from Natalie, who can probably share better than I can. She saw my TED Talk that I gave about this rare dance that took place in the Richmond, Virginia City Jail, where I'm from, in Virginia, and reached out to me after seeing the TED Talk to see if I would be interested in making a film. And I had an email, full of those requests, but what attracted me to Natalie's email was that she wanted to center the girls. And that was the only way to make this happen. So she came from LA to Virginia. We had coffee, tea, chatted it up, and what we discovered is that we had shared vision, shared values, but a shared voice. And she invited me to actually co-direct this film with her, knowing that we both needed to lean on each other with our strengths, with our resources and network.
Natalie, what attracted you to the project? You saw the TED Talk, I'm assuming this is the TED Talk that went viral about your work. But what attracted you and why did you see a film within that?
Yeah, it was so powerful. So for me, this was just such a amazing example of what could happen in the world if we let young women lead, and specifically these young Black girls. They're doing it a different way. They've come up with a program that is working and working in very inventive ways. And their heart, they show resilience, fearlessness, and forgiveness. And I just believe that everyone in the world could be inspired by what they're doing.
Tell us a little bit more about the programme, because it's a 12-week programme, I think it is.
Yes, 10 to 12 weeks.
Where the fathers have to engage, and if they don't, then they don't get to have the fulfilment of the dance with the daughter at the end of it.
Yes, the goal is to complete it, and the dance is the celebratory event. And so men can sign up who have daughters that are interested in participating in the Date with Dad program that actually was spearheaded because these young, fearless, unstoppable girls with this amazing, like just incredible imagination decided that they wanted to have this dance for their fathers because certain girls could not participate in community father-daughter dances. And so we knew that we just couldn't have a dance, right? We had to put something around it called heart work. And that's when we decided, Chad and I, who you would see in the film, is the fatherhood coach who's been working with me about 30 years, decided that we would put together a curriculum that he was using, but just making sure that it would center, again, father and daughter relationships, specifically for people in the Black and brown community that have been, unfortunately separated from their families in really ridiculous ways, right? These harmful practices. So the goal was to make sure that the fathers went through this program so they can be prepared, not only for the dance, but become responsible fathers. And now that you have this information, we hope that the aftercare would be that they will become more accountable, that they would show up and would not return back into the system. But the girls and the mothers or caregivers go through similar hard work as well.
Natalie, one of the things that they found through the programme is that 95% of the fathers that took part didn't re-offend and went on to be, useful members of society and good fathers.
Yeah, exactly. So through this family connection and this incredible program that Angela and Chad have developed and done for over 10 years, it's really quite transformative, and it was really an honor to be part of that journey in such an intimate way, seeing the fathers go through that, and as well for the mothers and the daughters on the outside. Sheriff Woody, who is the first sheriff who approved the program in Richmond, Virginia, always said that when the fathers are close to their family members, when families are united, there's less of a chance they will return. So it's really that simple in ways, and bringing families together, allowing them to touch and be together in person.
Angela, what would you say to those who would say to you that the fathers are in prison because they broke the law, and a lot of prison is about punishment, and this scheme is not a punishment? What's your answer?
Great question. I used to get that question and still do often, right? Now I have a tool to show, right? This film, which is why I was attracted to a way to bring about awareness. But I'm always going back to the humanity and just asking people to think about the rights of children. The girls or, boys that also are dealing with their family members being incarcerated should not be defined by their family's choices. And we also know that this is a cycle in a lot of the homes, and a lot of the fathers that are in our program are trying to do better. They sign up because they want to return stronger, wiser, and they also understand that they need to be in the home, but they need their children too. And sometimes we just need a reminder. Sometimes we need to go through this work. And so they were willing participants, so let's give them a shot.
Angela, I'm so sorry we've run out of time, but thank you very much for coming into the studio.
Thank you for having us.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
The most significant day of this conflict.
They keep telling us that they want aid. And this is what's left of it.
Tanks, heavy vehicle.
Why only in America?
People want their country to work.
Just want a job in a normal life.
Why are these homes empty?
I want you to be honest with people.
That has happened within minutes.
Sky News, the full story first. Free wherever you get your news.
We arrive. A secret hospital hidden in the Myanmar jungle, treating the victims of this bloody war. This is Myanmar today. Its military rulers don't want the world to see, but we have.
I fight for my own future. I fight for my generation's futures.
This is an actual crime.
They don't care for that.
Myanmar army is only a couple of kilometers away. So this is a major humanitarian disaster.
It's 10 o'clock. This is Sky News at 10, our top story. Adding fuel to the fire of the war in Ukraine. After America decides to allow its missiles to be used inside the country, Russia's warning of a new round of tension. Tonight, the European government's warning that President Putin's war may not be the only security threat after the apparent cutting of an undersea cable below the Baltic. As Sir Keir Starmer meets the leader, whose partnership with Russia was said to have no limits, the Prime Minister says he is doubling down on support for Ukraine. Also tonight,